Hey, what's up? Welcome back to your channel name. This time, we're going to dive into a story that will make you think twice before walking alone at night. Grab some snacks, turn off the lights, and listen closely. Nathan Holloway was not one to believe in ghost stories. As an investigative journalist who had spent years uncovering criminal cases, conspiracies, and political scandals, he knew that every mystery had a logical explanation. But the letter he received that morning felt different. There was no sender's name, no return address, just a few sheets of old paper that smelled damp, as if they had been hidden away for years. The message was urgent, written in a shaky hand, with ink smudged in places as if the writer had been trembling while composing it. The letter was a plea, or perhaps a warning, about a series of disappearances in a remote place called Rivermore, a village on the edge of Blackwater River. People are vanishing. They say it's a curse, but I know there's something in the water. Something waiting. Please, find out the truth before it's too late. There were no further details. No contact name, no explanation. But Nathan had spent years analyzing fear through handwriting, and this letter conveyed more than simple paranoia. Curiosity gnawed at him as he opened his laptop and searched for information about Rivermore. But there was almost nothing. The village had barely any recorded history, no news, no tourist accounts, no official records. It was as if the place was merely a forgotten speck on the map, erased from time. The less information available, the more determined Nathan became. This was the kind of mystery he couldn't ignore. He made his decision. He was going to Rivermore. Among the faded pages of the letter, one name stood out: Benjamin Crowley. The letter hinted that he might be the only one alive who knew the truth about what was happening in Rivermore. Nathan searched the name online, hoping to find traces of him in news archives or public records. But, like the village itself, Benjamin Crowley was a ghost. No official documents, no personal details, not even a mention on social media. The only record Nathan found was a nearly 3-decade-old newspaper clipping, a brief report about a young man named Benjamin Crowley, discovered in a state of shock after spending several nights near Blackwater River. There were no details about what had happened to him, only a note stating that he had refused to speak to anyone for years afterward. If the man was still alive and still in Rivermore, then he might be the key to understanding the truth. The journey to Rivermore was anything but easy. The roads became narrower and rougher the closer Nathan got to the village. His GPS showed that he was only a few miles away, but strangely, his phone signal weakened, and the navigation app kept glitching. Fog descended as he neared his destination, not the light mist of the mountains, but a dense, almost solid curtain of white that wrapped around the trees and the road ahead. The air grew colder than it should have been, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Rivermore was unlike any other village Nathan had visited. The houses were small and aged, with wooden walls that looked worn and moss-covered roofs. The streets were empty except for a few villagers walking by with their heads down, avoiding eye contact as if they knew his presence meant something unnatural had arrived. The Blackwater River flowed to the east of the village, its surface dark as ink. There were no birds chirping near the water, no gentle splashes from fish breaking the surface. It was as if the river was truly lifeless, waiting for something unseen. As Nathan stepped further into the village, a strange feeling crept over him, an unshakable sensation that he was being watched. Nathan tried talking to a few locals, asking about Benjamin Crowley or the missing people. But their reactions were always the same: awkward silence, suspicious glances, or hurried steps away before he could ask anything further. An old man sitting on his porch simply stared blankly before turning and disappearing inside his house, shutting the door without a word. A woman hanging laundry in her yard quickly gathered her clothes the moment she noticed Nathan approaching, retreating inside and bolting the window shut. Something was wrong here. This wasn't just normal distrust toward outsiders, it was something deeper, like a wound that had never healed. Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that they were all hiding something. The only place willing to let Nathan stay was a small inn at the far end of the village. The owner was an elderly woman with long white hair tied in a neat bun, her face lined with wrinkles that spoke of a life spent witnessing things she would rather forget. As Nathan handed her the money for his room, she looked at him with eyes filled with an unspoken warning. And before she turned away, in a whisper barely louder than the wind outside, she said, "Do not go near the river after sunset." A chill ran down Nathan's spine. He didn't know what was happening in this village, but one thing was certain: he had just stepped into something far bigger than he had imagined. Despite the villagers' cold demeanor, Nathan refused to give up. He wandered through the narrow streets of Rivermoor, hoping to find someone willing to talk. Most people turned away as soon as he approached, their expressions locked in silent apprehension. Then, just as he was about to return to the inn, he heard a hushed voice behind him. "You're the journalist, aren't you?" Nathan turned to find a man standing near the edge of an alleyway. He was in his mid-30s, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervous twitch in his fingers. He looked as if he hadn't slept in days. Oliver Kane. That was the name the man finally gave after a long hesitation. He was a lifelong resident of Rivermoor, and unlike the others, he seemed torn between fear and the urge to speak. Lowering his voice, Oliver revealed what Nathan had suspected all along: people who wandered too close to the river at night never returned. Their bodies were never found, and their names were never spoken again. It was as if the village itself was trying to erase them. When Nathan pressed for details, Oliver's face darkened. He muttered something almost inaudible before stepping away. "The river doesn't take kindly to outsiders." Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, Oliver melted back into the shadows, leaving Nathan with more questions than answers. That night, sleep did not come easily. The old bed creaked beneath Nathan's weight, and the stillness of the village made every sound seem amplified. But just as he was about to drift into uneasy rest, a new sound broke the silence. Whispering. At first, he thought it was the wind. But no, the voices were distinct, layered over one another in hushed, unintelligible murmurs. They were coming from outside his window. His pulse quickened. Moving as quietly as possible, he reached for his phone and switched on the recording app. Slowly, he crept toward the window, the floorboards groaning beneath his feet. Through the foggy glass, he saw nothing but the darkness beyond. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, like a chorus of voices speaking in a language he couldn't understand. Then, in the dim reflection of the windowpane, he saw something move. A shape, tall, thin, and indistinct, was standing just beyond the edge of the riverbank. Its form flickered as if not entirely solid, but its presence was undeniable. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. The whispering stopped. And then, in a heartbeat, the figure was gone. By the time dawn arrived, Nathan was certain of one thing: he was no longer just investigating a mystery. He was in the middle of it. Still rattled from the previous night, he stepped outside, breathing in the cold morning air in an attempt to clear his thoughts. But what he saw next made his blood run cold. Wet footprints. They stretched from the river's edge, trailing all the way to the front door of the inn. They weren't normal footprints either. The shape was wrong, the spacing unnatural, too far apart, as if whoever left them had been moving in an unnatural gait. The prints ended abruptly at the inn's entrance, vanishing as if the person had either disappeared into thin air or walked through the door. Nathan's stomach twisted. He glanced around, but the streets were empty. Someone, or something, had been here last night. And it had come looking for him. Determined to get answers, Nathan decided to track down the one person who might know the truth: Benjamin Crowley. It wasn't easy getting information, but after some careful prodding, he finally got what he needed from a reluctant villager. Crowley was still alive. But he didn't live in the village anymore. He had isolated himself in a cabin deep within the woods, refusing to come near Rivermoor. Nathan knew that meant only one thing: whatever haunted this village, Crowley had seen it firsthand. And if Nathan wanted to understand what was lurking in the river, he would have to find the one man who had survived it. Nathan packed his bag with essentials: his notebook, a flashlight, a voice recorder, and his camera. He wasn't sure what he was walking into, but he knew he had to find Crowley. If anyone had answers about the disappearances and the whispers by the river, it was him. As he zipped up his jacket and prepared to leave, the innkeeper appeared at the doorway of the small dining hall, watching him with an expression that was equal parts pity and fear. "You're going to the woods, aren't you?" she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan hesitated before nodding. There was no point in lying. The old woman exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "No one who goes into those woods alone ever comes back. The river doesn't just stay in its banks, it reaches, it calls, and when you're deep enough in the trees, it finds you." Her words sent an involuntary shiver down Nathan's spine, but he wasn't about to turn back now. He had spent years chasing dangerous stories, and this was no different. Or so he told himself. Still, as he stepped out of the inn and into the cold morning air, the feeling of being watched clung to him like a second skin. The path leading into the woods was barely visible, more of a forgotten trail than a real road. The trees were ancient, their twisted roots breaking through the earth like the fingers of something long buried. The deeper Nathan walked, the quieter the world became. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an unnatural silence. Then he saw them. Strange wooden effigies hung from the trees, swaying gently even though there was no wind. Each one was carved into a crude, elongated human shape, with hollow eyes and jagged mouths. Some were bound in knotted rope, others had tiny bones embedded into them. Nathan reached out to touch one, but the moment his fingers brushed against the wood, a sharp crack echoed through the trees, like something stepping on a branch. He froze. The sound had come from behind him. Slowly, he turned. There was nothing there. Just the empty, waiting woods. Nathan forced himself to keep walking. He couldn't let fear cloud his judgment, not yet. He focused on the barely visible path ahead, telling himself that the effigies were just superstitions, nothing more. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, matching his pace exactly. Nathan stopped. The footsteps stopped too. His breath came faster now. He turned his head slightly, listening, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. Nothing. Swallowing down the growing dread, he took another step forward. And again, the sound followed. But this time, it was closer. After what felt like an eternity, the trees finally opened up into a small clearing. There, at the center, stood Benjamin Crowley's cabin. It was in worse condition than Nathan had expected, half-rotted wood, a sagging roof, and a chimney that had long since crumbled. The windows were boarded up, the door slightly ajar, swinging in the wind with a slow, rhythmic creak. Nathan took a cautious step forward, his eyes scanning the area. That was when he noticed the bones. They were scattered around the cabin, some small, some larger, their edges picked clean. At first, he assumed they belonged to animals, but then he saw something that made his stomach tighten. A human skull, half buried in the dirt near the porch. Nathan hesitated for the first time since arriving in Rivermore. Was Crowley still alive? And if he was, had he truly been hiding, or was he something else now? Gathering his nerve, Nathan pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air inside the cabin was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something sour, like decay left too long in the damp. Dust coated every surface, and cobwebs clung to the rafters like ghostly fingers. The place looked abandoned. Yet, there were signs that someone had been here recently, a half-burned candle on the table, muddy footprints near the door. Then he saw them. Journals. Dozens of them, stacked in uneven piles on a wooden desk in the corner. Some were nearly falling apart, their pages yellowed with age. Nathan picked one up and flipped through it. The handwriting was frantic, uneven, filled with half-finished sentences and ink smeared as if written in a hurry. The river is not just water. It listens. It waits. They think it's just a legend, but I saw it. It wears the faces of the lost. If you hear it whisper, don't answer. No matter how much it sounds like someone you love. Nathan swallowed hard. The words sent a chill through him, not just because of their meaning, but because of the final, hastily scrawled sentence at the bottom of the page. It knows you're here. Nathan flipped through the brittle pages, his fingers tracing over the inked words as if they might reveal more if he looked hard enough. Then, he found it, a passage that sent ice through his veins. The drowned ones. The words were underlined several times, as if Crowley had wanted to make sure no one could ignore them. Nathan read on, his breath hitching as he took in the descriptions scrawled in increasingly frantic handwriting. They were the first to hear the whispers. The first to answer. They were taken, pulled into the depths, and when they returned, they were not themselves. They walked the riverbanks on moonless nights, their bodies swollen and slick with rot, their mouths whispering the words of the current. If you see them, if you hear them, run. Because they are searching. And when they find you, they will pull you into the water, and you will never come back the same. Nathan's grip on the journal tightened. He had seen something by the river his first night here. A figure, watching, waiting. Had he already come too close? Then, a sound broke through the silence of the cabin. A wet, shuffling step, just outside the door. Nathan's heart pounded as the door slowly creaked open, the rusted hinges groaning in protest. Cold air rushed inside, carrying the scent of damp earth and stagnant water. He turned quickly, his eyes scanning the entrance, but the doorway was empty. No one stood there. No shadow lingered beyond the threshold. But then he saw them. Wet footprints. They trailed across the wooden floor, leading from the doorway, straight toward him. The water pooled at the edges, dripping from something unseen, something that had entered the cabin without making a sound. Nathan took a step back, his breath shallow. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. He forced himself to remain still, listening. Silence. Then, the sound of dripping water. Somewhere in the room, something was waiting. Adrenaline surged through Nathan as he grabbed as many of the journals as he could carry. He didn't dare look around, didn't dare try to see what might be lurking just beyond his vision. He needed to leave. Now. Shoving the journals into his bag, he bolted for the door, his boots slipping slightly on the damp wood. As soon as he crossed the threshold, the feeling of being watched intensified, pressing against his skin like unseen hands. The forest seemed darker than before, the trees more twisted, the air thick with a suffocating humidity that hadn't been there earlier. Nathan's instincts screamed at him to move faster, to not stop, no matter what he heard. And then, whispers. Faint at first, carried by the wind. But they grew louder, overlapping, rising in a maddening chorus of voices that weren't quite human. He didn't dare look back. Nathan's breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed forward, his feet barely finding steady ground in the uneven terrain. He knew he was getting closer to the village, but every step felt like he was moving through something thick and invisible, something that did not want him to leave. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw them. Figures. Pale. Motionless. Standing between the trees. They did not move, did not chase, did not speak. But their presence was undeniable. Their faces were wrong, too smooth, too blurred, like waterlogged corpses left too long beneath the surface. Nathan's pulse hammered in his ears as he forced himself to keep going. Don't look. Don't stop. Just run. But even as he escaped the tree line and stumbled onto the outskirts of Rivermore, the figures remained. Watching. Waiting. By the time Nathan reached the village, he was shaking. His clothes were damp with sweat, his hands still gripping his bag as if letting go would somehow invite something worse. But as he stepped onto the main street, he realized something was wrong. No one was outside. The village, usually quiet but still alive with the occasional passerby, was utterly still. Shutters were drawn. Curtains twitched. He felt their eyes on him. watching from the shadows of their homes, peering through small openings as if afraid to be seen. No one came out to question him. No one asked what had happened. They already knew. Nathan took a deep breath, steadying himself. He needed to figure out what was happening here, what the villagers weren't telling him. But first, he needed to find Oliver Kane. Because something told him that after tonight, he wouldn't be the only one being followed. Nathan shut the door to his room, sliding the lock into place with hands that still trembled from his escape. The dim lantern on his bedside table flickered slightly, casting long, wavering shadows against the walls. He knew he was safe inside, at least, that's what he told himself. He dropped his bag onto the bed and pulled out the journals he had taken from Crowley's cabin. The pages smelled of damp earth and old ink, the words inside a frantic scrawl of warnings and cryptic messages. But his mind was too restless to focus on reading. Outside, the village remained unervingly silent. Then, just past midnight, the whispers returned. At first, they were distant, like voices carried by the wind. But soon, they grew closer. Nathan sat up, every muscle in his body tensed as the sounds moved beyond his window, slow and deliberate, as if someone, or something, was standing just outside. He didn't dare move. The voices weren't speaking any language he recognized. They were layered, overlapping in a sickening harmony, like dozens of mouths whispering in unison. Then, the doorknob rattled. Nathan held his breath. Something was trying to get in. Sometime during the night, exhaustion overtook him. He didn't remember falling asleep, only that the whispers had continued until his mind could no longer fight against the weight of fatigue. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he noticed was the silence. The whispers were gone. The village outside was still. Then, his eyes drifted toward the door. The doorknob was wet. Not just damp, but slick with something that left a faint, dark stain against the old wood of the door. His stomach turned at the sight of it. Slowly, he reached out and touched the metal. The moisture was cold, leaving a thin film against his fingertips. It smelled faintly of the river. Something had been inside the inn. Something had been standing right outside his room. Nathan knew he couldn't stay in his room all day, no matter how much his instincts told him otherwise. He needed answers. And the only person who might be willing to give them was Oliver Kane. After gathering his things, he stepped out onto the main street. The air was damp, carrying the distant scent of the river. As he passed the small market, he stopped an older man who was stacking crates of dried fish. "Do you know where I can find Oliver Kane?" Nathan asked. The man froze. Slowly, he lifted his head, his eyes dark with something that looked a lot like fear. He glanced around, as if making sure no one else was listening, then muttered, "You shouldn't say that name." Nathan frowned. "Why?" But the man only shook his head and turned away, gripping the wooden crates so tightly his knuckles turned white. Nathan tried again with a woman selling candles near the inn. "Do you know where Oliver Kane lives?" She didn't answer. Instead, she gathered her things in a hurry and disappeared into one of the nearby houses, slamming the door shut behind her. Nathan exhaled sharply. Whatever had happened to Oliver Kane, the village wanted to forget. And that only made Nathan more determined to find him. Nathan followed the dirt road out of the village, his boots crunching against the damp ground. The path led toward the eastern edge of Rivermoor, where the trees were denser, the mist heavier. Then, he saw the house. It was old, even older than Crowley's cabin. The wooden planks were warped and splintered, the windows cracked, the roof sagging in places where the rain had worn it down. A broken lantern swung from the porch, creaking with every faint gust of wind. But it wasn't just the decay that made the house unsettling. It was the fact that there were no signs of life. No movement. No smoke from the chimney. No footprints in the damp soil leading up to the front steps. Nathan hesitated before stepping onto the porch. The wood groaned under his weight. He tried the door. It swung open with an eerie slowness, revealing only darkness inside. Oliver Kane had lived here. But was he still alive? Nathan stepped inside cautiously, his flashlight cutting through the thick dust swirling in the air. The house smelled of mold and something stale, like it hadn't been lived in for a long time. But then he saw the papers. Stacks of old maps, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes covered a wooden table near the fireplace. Nathan moved closer, brushing aside a thick layer of dust to reveal what Kane had been working on. There were sketches of the river, marked with strange symbols. Old reports about disappearances. And then, Nathan's pulse quickened. A photograph. It was faded, its edges curled with age. It showed a group of people standing near the riverbank. And among them, a familiar face. Nathan's own face. His blood ran cold. The photograph looked decades old, impossible for him to be in it. And yet, there he was. Nathan wasn't just investigating the mystery of the river. He was already part of it. Nathan's hands trembled as he stared at the photograph. His mind scrambled for an explanation, but none made sense. How could he, someone who had only arrived in Rivermore a few days ago, be in a photograph that looked decades old? A creeping unease settled in his chest. The more he looked around the house, the stronger the feeling became. The scent of damp wood, the creak of the old floorboards, even the way the dust settled in the air, it all felt disturbingly familiar. Then, something else caught his eye. A chair near the fireplace, covered in dust but slightly shifted away from the table. As if someone had been sitting there recently. The papers on the desk, though aged, were arranged with an odd sense of order, like someone had been in the middle of researching before abruptly leaving. Or disappearing. Nathan clenched his fists, trying to push away the growing panic. He knew one thing for certain, whatever had brought him here, whatever mystery surrounded the river, he was already tangled in it. And it wasn't finished with him yet. Nathan's fingers brushed against a leather-bound journal tucked between a stack of old maps. The name Oliver Kane was etched faintly on the cover. Heart pounding, he opened it. The handwriting was hurried, the ink smudged in places, as if Kane had been writing in a rush, or in fear. The river calls. It always has. It chooses who will listen and who will be taken. The villagers know, but they do not speak of it. Because once you hear it, there is no escape. Nathan flipped through the pages, scanning entries filled with observations, theories, desperate warnings. Then he found a passage that made his breath hitch. The cycle. It happens over and over again. Different people, different times, but always the same. The whispers. The disappearances. The ones who come back, but not as themselves. And then, the river takes more. Nathan swallowed hard. The cycle. Was that what was happening now? Had it happened to him before? The photograph. The déjà vu. The way the villagers refused to speak his name. A terrifying thought crept into his mind. What if he wasn't here for the first time? What if he had already been part of this before? Nathan exhaled shakily, his grip tightening on the journal. He could feel it now, something pressing against the air, thick and heavy, as if the house itself was alive. A shift in the atmosphere. The silence became too loud. The weight of unseen eyes bore down on him, making the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked. Nathan's pulse spiked. His rational mind told him it was just the house settling, the old wood shifting against itself. But another part of him, the part that had seen things he couldn't explain, knew better. Something was in here with him. He turned slowly, his breath shallow, scanning the dimly lit room. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, twisting and shifting as if they were moving on their own. And then, a whisper. Close. Too close. Nathan slammed the journal shut. He had to leave. Now. Nathan stumbled out onto the porch, gulping in the cold, damp air. He expected the whispers to fade, to vanish with the weight of the house behind him. But instead, they grew louder. They came from all around him now, rising and falling in an eerie, rhythmic chant. He turned his head sharply, scanning the tree line, the empty road, the mist rolling in from the river. No one was there. And yet, the voices were everywhere. Nathan's legs felt weak, but he forced himself to move, descending the steps quickly. He clutched the journal in one hand, his other gripping the strap of his bag like a lifeline. The whispers didn't stop. They followed. No, they closed in. A sudden gust of wind blew through the trees, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of decaying river water. Nathan's stomach churned. The mist thickened around him, curling at his feet like grasping fingers. Then, just as abruptly as they had begun, the whispers stopped. Silence. Complete. Utter. Silence. Nathan barely had time to take another breath before he saw them. Figures. Emerging from the mist. Pale. Hollow-eyed. Watching. Waiting. Nathan froze. His pulse thundered in his ears as his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The figures stood motionless, their forms barely distinguishable from the mist that swirled around them. Their skin was damp, their eyes sunken, their lips moving in soundless whispers. But then, he saw it. One of them was him. The same face. The same features. But wrong. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, like something that had been submerged in water for far too long. Its lips curled slightly, not in a smile, but in something far worse, an understanding. Nathan couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The figure lifted a hand, a slow, deliberate movement. And then, in a voice that was his own, but hollow, distant. "It's time to come back." The last thing Nathan heard before everything went black was the sound of rushing water. Darkness. Cold. The crushing weight of water pressing down on him. Nathan's lungs burned as he instinctively thrashed against the current, his body twisting in the suffocating embrace of the river. Panic surged through him as he kicked upward, his fingers clawing through the water, desperate for something, anything, to hold on to. His chest tightened. He couldn't breathe. The river was pulling him down. Bubbles rushed past his face as he struggled against an unseen force, his limbs growing weaker with every second. His vision blurred, the world around him shifting into something unreal. Shapes moved in the darkness, figures drifting just beyond reach. And then, hands. Pale, lifeless hands, reaching out from the shadows of the deep, fingers curling around his wrists, his ankles. They weren't dragging him down. They were holding him there. Nathan's pulse pounded in his skull. His body screamed for air. Just as the last of his strength faded, just as his mind surrendered to the encroaching blackness. He broke the surface. Cold air flooded his lungs as he gasped, coughing violently, the river's icy grip releasing him. The world tilted as he flailed, desperate to find the riverbank. And then he saw it, the village. But something was wrong. It didn't look the same. Nathan crawled onto the muddy shore, his body shaking, clothes soaked through to the bone. He collapsed onto his back, gasping, his chest rising and falling in ragged, uneven breaths. He had made it. He was alive. But as he slowly pushed himself up onto his elbows, a sinking feeling settled in his gut. The village was there, but something about it was wrong. The buildings looked older, more worn down, like they had been abandoned for years. The wooden planks of the docks were rotting, sagging under their own weight. The few boats floating near the shore were covered in moss and decay, as if they hadn't been used in decades. And then there was the silence. No voices. No sounds of life. The village was empty. Nathan's pulse quickened. Had the river taken him somewhere else? Had he somehow traveled back in time? Or worse, had the village never existed at all? Nathan staggered to his feet, his legs unsteady beneath him. His wet clothes clung to his skin, the cold seeping into his bones. He took a hesitant step forward, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The silence pressed against him like a weight, heavy and suffocating. The streets were lined with empty houses, their windows broken, doors hanging open. The once familiar buildings, the inn, the market, the blacksmith's shop, were nothing more than hollow shells, as if the village had been abandoned long ago. Nathan's breath hitched. The village wasn't just different. It was dead. But that was impossible. He had been here just hours ago. He had spoken to people, touched the walls, smelled the smoke from burning fires. And yet, now, it was as if none of it had ever happened. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as a chilling thought crept into his mind. Had the village changed? Or had he? Nathan forced himself to move, his boots echoing unnaturally loud against the wooden planks of the dock as he stepped further into the village. Every shadow felt longer, every alleyway darker, as if the entire place was holding its breath. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A flicker of movement. His head snapped toward one of the abandoned houses. A second-floor window, its glass cracked and covered in dust. For just a split second, he swore he saw a silhouette, a figure standing motionless, watching him. A surge of adrenaline shot through him. Someone was here. He stepped closer, squinting up at the window, his heart hammering in his chest. Nothing. The room beyond was empty. Nathan swallowed hard, a chill creeping down his spine. Had he imagined it? Or was something playing with him? A soft creak echoed from inside the house. Nathan didn't wait to find out. He turned and ran. Nathan sprinted down the empty street, his breath ragged, his pulse a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. The cold air burned his lungs, but he didn't stop. Then, he heard them. Footsteps. Not his own. They were close, just behind him, moving fast, matching his pace. Nathan's blood turned to ice. He twisted his head to look over his shoulder. Nothing. The street behind him was empty. The footsteps stopped. A deafening silence followed. Nathan swallowed hard, his muscles tense, every instinct screaming at him to keep moving. But then, just as he turned back around, a whisper. Right next to his ear. "You're not supposed to be here." Nathan's vision blurred. A sharp, electric coldness shot through his skull. And then, darkness. Nathan's eyes snapped open. His vision was blurred, his head spinning. A thick fog clung to the ground, swirling around his body, making it hard to breathe. The air felt heavy, as if the forest itself was holding him down. He pushed himself up slowly, his fingers brushing against damp leaves and thick undergrowth. The familiar sounds of the village were gone, replaced by the oppressive silence of the forest. The trees were tall, their twisted branches reaching out like hands. The mist was thick, and there was no sign of the village, no sign of anything familiar. Just the forest. His heart pounded in his chest. Had he been moved? Or had he traveled here? The thought of the river, of the whispering voices, flooded his mind. He'd been so sure he was escaping. But now, he was somewhere else. Somewhere wrong. Nathan staggered to his feet, his legs weak and unsteady beneath him. He wiped his damp forehead, trying to clear his mind, but everything felt wrong. The trees stretched endlessly in all directions, and the fog grew thicker the further he looked. And then he saw it. A figure. A silhouette in the mist. It stood motionless, like a statue, at the edge of the forest, just beyond the reach of his vision. Nathan's stomach twisted. He couldn't make out any details, no face, no clothing, just the outline of a person standing perfectly still, watching him. His first instinct was to run. But something, some strange force, held him in place. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the figure. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the figure moved. But it didn't walk. It glided. Closer. Closer still. Nathan's heart skipped a beat as the figure's form sharpened, the edges of its figure now distinguishable in the mist. It was him. Not exactly, but enough to send a chill down his spine. The same face. The same body. But the eyes. Empty. Dark. Nathan took a shaky step forward, his breath quickening. The figure was gone. Disappeared into the mist as suddenly as it had appeared. He stood frozen, staring at the spot where it had been just seconds ago, his mind reeling. Was he imagining things? Had the shock of everything, the river, the village, caused him to lose his grip on reality? But no. He knew what he had seen. He knew what he had seen. That wasn't just some random person. That was a reflection of himself. A twisted, hollow version of him, lost in the fog. The forest felt like it was closing in around him. The silence pressed against him, suffocating. Every step he took seemed to echo too loudly, as if the forest was alive, watching him, following his every move. Nathan's footsteps faltered. He paused, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. It was the feeling again. That pressure. That sense of being watched. He turned slowly, his heart hammering in his chest. But there was nothing. No figure. No sound. Just the stillness of the forest. Then, a soft breath, almost imperceptible, tickled the back of his neck. His blood ran cold. Someone, or something, was there. He spun around, his eyes darting through the mist, but it was empty. Nothing but the shadowed trees. Nathan's pulse raced as the forest seemed to close in tighter around him. He could feel it. The presence. Something was there, just out of sight, moving with him. A shift in the air. A rustle behind him. Nathan forced himself to take a deep breath. He wasn't alone. The forest was never empty. But who, or what, was stalking him now? Nathan's body tensed, every muscle locked in place. There it was again. The whisper. Soft, haunting, but clear. Nathan. It wasn't his own name. It didn't sound like anyone he knew. It was distant, hollow, yet somehow it felt like it was coming from inside his own mind. He spun around, his breath shallow, his heart pounding in his throat. Nothing. The forest was still. The whisper came again, this time louder. Nathan, come closer. The voice seemed to echo from every direction, all around him, filling his head, pressing against his thoughts. It was familiar, but it was wrong. It was the same whisper he had heard at the river. The same one that had led him here, deeper into this strange, shifting world. His instincts screamed at him to run, to leave the forest, to get away from the voice. But it was too late. The mist thickened around him, swirling faster, as if it were alive. The voice grew louder, more insistent, pulling him deeper into the unknown. Nathan stepped forward, compelled by the voice, his mind clouded with fear and curiosity. He had to know what it wanted. He had to know what he had become a part of. Nathan's steps faltered as he continued moving deeper into the fog. Each breath was shallow, each step heavier than the last. The voice, soft and beckoning, pushed him forward, like an invisible force pulling at the very core of his being. He stumbled through the thick mist, his eyes struggling to make sense of his surroundings. The trees were no longer just trees, they seemed to shift, bending in unnatural directions. The ground felt uneven, as if it were shifting beneath his feet. The air was thicker here, colder. It pressed against him like the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. Nathan, come closer. He couldn't tell whether the voice was real or just a product of his own mind. But something inside him told him he had no choice but to follow. The fog closed in, and he could no longer see beyond a few feet in front of him. The forest around him felt alive, twisting and curling in ways that made him question what was real. Trees grew from the ground at odd angles, their roots clawing up from the soil like fingers. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, reaching for him. Was he dreaming? Or was he caught in some sort of nightmare? The voice urged him onward. And, against his better judgment, Nathan complied. As Nathan continued to stumble through the dense fog, the forest grew even stranger. The trees around him no longer looked like ordinary trees. Their trunks twisted in grotesque shapes, their branches extended like arms, reaching out to him, almost as if they were trying to grab him. The shadows at the edge of his vision seemed to shift and move, morphing into vague, humanoid shapes. Figures stood just out of the mist, barely visible but unmistakably human-like. They watched him silently, unmoving, as if they were waiting for something. Nathan's heart raced. He didn't want to look closer, but the pull of the voice, the pressure of the figures surrounding him, made it impossible to look away. The shapes were too distinct to be mere shadows. He could make out their outlines, their features, but they were blurred, distorted, like reflections in a cracked mirror. And then, one of the figures moved. It took a slow step forward, its form warping with each motion, before disappearing back into the mist. Nathan froze. He wasn't alone. A cold shiver ran down Nathan's spine as the memory resurfaced. The villagers had warned him, had begged him, to stay away from the forest. They had said that the mist was not just fog, it was something much darker. Something that twisted reality, that made people disappear. He hadn't paid attention at the time. He had dismissed their warnings as superstition. But now, standing in the heart of the forest, feeling the heavy presence of the figures watching him, the weight of their words was clear. He had made a mistake. Nathan's pulse quickened. He had ventured too far, followed the voice too deep into the forest. And now it was too late to turn back. He could hear the trees creaking around him, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. The figures seemed to be closing in. Was he already too far gone? The fog began to thin ever so slightly as Nathan continued forward, his eyes straining to make sense of the faint shapes ahead. His mind was fogged with confusion and dread, but something kept pulling him forward. Through the mist, he saw it. A clearing. In the center, partially obscured by vines and overgrown foliage, was an altar. It was old, crumbling, made of weathered stone, with strange markings carved into its surface. The symbols looked foreign, their meanings unclear. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. The altar seemed out of place. Everything around it, the twisted trees, the fog, seemed to bend toward it, as if drawn by an unseen force. And then, he noticed something even more unsettling. Atop the altar, lying motionless, was a body. The figure was still, pale, and lifeless, draped in tattered clothes that seemed to match the eerie surroundings. Nathan's eyes widened in horror. Was this the end of the journey for anyone who ventured too far? Was he to become just another lifeless form atop the altar, another sacrifice to whatever dwelled in this forsaken place? He took a step closer, his feet moving without his consent. The pull was too strong to resist. As Nathan stepped closer to the altar, his pulse thundered in his ears. He could feel the presence of the figures closing in around him again, but he couldn't stop. The closer he got to the altar, the more he felt as if something was drawing him there, something ancient, something malevolent. The air grew colder still. And then, his eyes locked onto the body on the altar. It was him. Or at least, it looked like him. But it wasn't right. The figure lying there was distorted, twisted in ways that made his stomach churn. The clothes were tattered, the skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its face was a sickening mockery of his own. Its eyes were open wide, but they were lifeless, black voids. Nathan took a step back, his heart thumping painfully in his chest. This was impossible. How could it be him? The body's lips curled into a twisted smile, a smile that mirrored his own. And then, the voice. "You were always meant to come here, Nathan." The voice was everywhere now, echoing through the fog, through his mind. His heart pounded. He didn't belong here. He didn't belong. But something inside him knew, it was too late to leave. Nathan's heart raced as he took another step back, his breath shallow and quick. His eyes were locked on the twisted figure that resembled him, yet something was fundamentally wrong with it. The cold air around him seemed to tighten, the mist swirling violently as if the forest itself was feeding off his fear. How could it be him? He had seen himself, yes, but this wasn't just a reflection. This was something more sinister. A version of him distorted beyond recognition, dead and cold on an altar that seemed to draw him in. He took another shaky step back, but his feet felt as though they were glued to the earth. The forest was alive, pulsing with an energy he couldn't escape. The figures, those shadowy, humanoid shapes, were now all around him, their eyes glowing faintly through the fog. The whispering voice, once distant and soft, now echoed in his mind, as if it were coming from every direction. It was urgent, seductive, pulling him toward the altar. "It's your fate, Nathan. You belong here." He shook his head violently, as if trying to dislodge the thoughts consuming him. No, he couldn't accept this. He didn't belong in this twisted place. He wasn't meant to be trapped in a nightmare. But as he stood there, frozen in place, he felt the pull. Something inside him, some dark part of his soul, was answering the call. Nathan clenched his fists, trying to drown out the voices. But it was impossible. "Nathan. Nathan. Nathan." The chorus of whispers filled the air, each voice more chilling than the last. They came from all around him, overlapping, growing louder, as though they were coming from the very trees themselves. His mind struggled to focus, but the sound was deafening. He covered his ears, trying to block it out, but the voices continued to surge through him, invading his thoughts. "Nathan. You're already one of us." The word sent a chill through him. What did they mean by that? The figures in the mist closed in even further, their movements slow but deliberate, like predators circling their prey. He could see their faces now, twisted, hollow, and staring at him with empty eyes. Some of them resembled people he had seen in the village, others were completely unfamiliar. But their presence was suffocating, their intent clear, they wanted him. Something was drawing him deeper into the mist. Something ancient and malevolent was beckoning him forward. The ground suddenly shuddered beneath his feet, and Nathan staggered, struggling to maintain his balance. His heart thudded in his chest, each beat reverberating through his entire body. The forest itself seemed to react to his fear, its pulse syncing with his own, faster, stronger, as if the very land was alive. The trees creaked and groaned, their roots snapping like bones. The shadows around him lengthened, stretching and contorting in unnatural ways. The air felt heavier with each passing second, pressing down on him from all sides. And then, the ground trembled again, more violently this time. Nathan stumbled as the earth beneath him cracked open, revealing an abyss of darkness. It was as though the forest was trying to swallow him whole, its insatiable hunger growing. The figures in the mist moved closer, their eyes glinting with hunger and malice. "Come to us, Nathan." It was no longer a suggestion. It was a command. The fog thickened, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't want to give in, but he felt his legs moving of their own accord, pulled toward the center of the clearing where the altar stood. The forest was alive. And it wanted him. As Nathan's feet carried him toward the altar, a faint glow began to radiate from the stone surface. The markings on the altar, which had appeared so faded and worn, were now glowing faintly, lines of ancient symbols carved deep into the stone. The light grew brighter with each step he took, pulsating with a rhythm that seemed to sync with his own heartbeat. The mist around him parted as if the altar itself was drawing the fog away, revealing more of the strange symbols. They were unfamiliar, foreign to him, yet they felt strangely familiar, like they were calling to him. He reached the altar, standing before the lifeless body that resembled his own. The symbols on the altar continued to glow, their light pulsing like a heartbeat. Nathan's hand trembled as he reached out to touch the stone, and as soon as his fingers made contact, a surge of cold energy coursed through him. The whispering voices grew louder, and the figures in the mist seemed to move closer, their eyes locked on him. Their presence was overwhelming, suffocating. "It's time, Nathan." The voices merged into a single, unified chant, filling his mind and drowning out everything else. The symbols on the altar flared to life, casting a blinding light that swallowed the entire clearing. With trembling hands, Nathan reached for the glowing symbol etched into the altar. The moment his fingers brushed against the surface, a violent shock of energy surged through him, seizing his body. His vision blurred, the world around him distorting as if he were being pulled into a vortex. The ground beneath him cracked open wider, and the figures in the mist, those shadowy, hollow beings, closed in on him, their forms twisting and warping. The forest itself seemed to writhe in pain, its roots cracking and splitting open. Nathan's body felt weightless, as though he were no longer standing on solid ground. His mind was flooded with images, visions of the past, of the river, of the strange village, and the twisted altar before him. But they were all fragments, shattered pieces of a reality that no longer made sense. The altar's glow intensified, and Nathan was consumed by the blinding light. He felt himself slipping, his grip on reality fading. And then, everything went dark. Nathan's eyes flickered open, but the world around him was pitch black. His body felt heavy, as if he were lying on something cold and damp. He tried to move, but his limbs were stiff, almost as though they had been immobile for too long. His head throbbed, and his mind felt foggy, disconnected from reality. He blinked several times, trying to make sense of the surroundings. Nothing but darkness. Where was he? How did he get here? He couldn't remember. The last thing he recalled was touching the glowing symbol on the altar. But now, it felt as though everything was a distant memory, a dream that was quickly slipping through his fingers. His heart pounded in his chest, and his breath became shallow. There was an unsettling stillness in the air, as though someone, was waiting. Nathan slowly pushed himself to sit up, his hand brushing against the cold ground. The silence was deafening. He couldn't see anything, but the feeling of being watched lingered in the pit of his stomach. Where was the forest? The altar? The voices? He had to find a way out. But the more he tried to move, the more the feeling of dread settled over him, as if something was pulling at his very soul. As Nathan sat in the darkness, trying to regain his bearings, a faint light appeared in the distance. It flickered like a distant star, casting a weak glow in the otherwise impenetrable blackness. It wasn't much, just a small flicker, but it drew his attention. There was something about it that seemed familiar, almost comforting, as if it were calling to him. His body moved instinctively, despite his fear. He needed to get closer to that light. Slowly, cautiously, he stood up. His legs wobbled beneath him, and the ground felt uneven, as though it was shifting with each step he took. The darkness around him pressed in, suffocating, but the light kept pulling him forward. As he walked, the light grew stronger, its edges sharpening. It was like a beacon in the night, guiding him through the unknown. But with each step he took, a gnawing sense of unease crept up on him. Was he walking toward salvation, or into more danger? After what felt like an eternity of walking through the oppressive darkness, Nathan finally reached the source of the light, a strange, hollow tree. The trunk was wide and gnarled, twisted like something out of a nightmare, but the light emanated from within it, casting an eerie glow. Curious, Nathan moved closer, his heart racing. The glow came from the hollow opening at the base of the tree. He knelt down, peering inside, expecting to see some kind of natural light source, but what he found was far from ordinary. Inside the tree, there was movement. Something shifted, a shadow within the light, twisting and writhing. Nathan's breath hitched as a pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness. They were not human, nor were they any creature he had ever seen before. The eyes seemed to blink slowly, studying him, assessing him as if they had been waiting for him all along. He froze. What was inside that tree? Was it a trap? A monster? The shadow within the tree continued to stir, and the eyes never left him. Nathan's pulse raced, his body frozen in place. The shadow inside the tree began to take form, shifting and elongating. He could make out the faint shape of a figure, something humanoid, but twisted, distorted. It had long, thin limbs, and its body was skeletal, like a corpse, but somehow, it moved with unsettling fluidity. The figure's face remained hidden in the shadows, but those glowing eyes, cold and predatory, stared at him unblinking. Nathan could feel the air around him grow colder, the very presence of the figure making the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He wanted to move, to run, but his legs refused to obey him. The light from the tree pulsed, casting the figure in an eerie glow, its body swaying as if it were waiting for something. It reached out slowly, its bony fingers stretching toward Nathan. He could feel the pull of the creature, the weight of its presence wrapping around him like a suffocating blanket. "You should have never come here," a voice whispered from the shadows. Nathan's blood ran cold. The voice was low, rasping, as though it had been buried for centuries. And yet, somehow, he understood the meaning behind the words. He had made a mistake. He was in the wrong place. The figure's skeletal hand hovered inches from Nathan's face, its bony fingers trembling with anticipation. The cold emanating from it was unbearable, like the chill of death itself. Nathan could barely breathe. He was caught, trapped between fear and an overwhelming sense of something ancient, something wrong. "You've crossed the line now, Nathan," the figure hissed, its voice slithering into Nathan's mind. "There is no going back. You belong to us, whether you accept it or not." The words echoed in his skull, reverberating like a distant drumbeat. The voice felt all-encompassing, as though it had always been there, lurking beneath the surface of his consciousness. Nathan's heart hammered in his chest. Was this truly happening? Was he losing his grip on reality? Everything he had thought he knew about the world, about the forest, the voices, the altar, was beginning to unravel. Was it all part of some ancient force? Had he been led here by something greater than himself? The figure leaned closer, its eyes glowing brighter, casting a hellish light over the clearing. "You are no longer Nathan." The voice was a whisper now, barely audible, but it chilled him to the bone. "You are part of this place." The words felt like a death sentence, and Nathan felt the weight of them press down on him as the figure's hand moved closer, reaching for him. As the skeletal hand reached for him, Nathan's panic surged like a tidal wave. He couldn't think straight. His body screamed at him to move, but his legs felt like they were made of stone, frozen in place. The darkness around him seemed to grow heavier, and the air itself seemed to conspire against him, making it harder to breathe. His pulse hammered in his ears as the figure's fingers hovered just above his skin, its presence consuming every thought he had. The figure was so close now, its cold, lifeless breath brushing against his face. He needed to escape. In a moment of desperation, Nathan forced his legs to move. He pushed himself backward, stumbling and falling onto the cold ground. The air seemed to crackle with energy as he scrambled away, but the figure remained eerily calm, its eyes never leaving him. The whispers in the air grew louder, more urgent, as though they were coming from all around him, pushing him deeper into the darkness. The forest itself seemed to tighten its grip, the roots of the trees stretching toward him like hands. He had to run. Nathan stumbled to his feet, his legs trembling beneath him as he dashed away from the hollow tree. The earth beneath him seemed to shift and tremble with each step, the ground cracking and splintering as though the forest was trying to swallow him whole. He could hear the faint hissing of the figure behind him, a low, unsettling sound that seemed to follow him through the mist. The light from the tree flickered in the distance, casting strange, distorted shadows over the landscape. He couldn't tell where he was running anymore, the world around him had become a twisted blur of dark trees and shifting ground. But the whispers followed him, relentless, haunting. "You cannot escape, Nathan. Every step he took felt like it was leading him deeper into the heart of the forest, further away from the world he had known. The more he ran, the more the darkness seemed to close in around him, until the very air itself felt thick with dread. But something within him refused to give up. He couldn't stop now. Just as Nathan thought he might have a chance to escape, a powerful force slammed into him from behind, knocking him to the ground. The breath was forced from his lungs as he hit the cold earth, pain shooting through his body. He gasped for air, but his limbs felt weak, like they were no longer his own. The mist around him thickened once more, swirling with a sinister energy. He looked up and saw the figures again, their hollow eyes gleaming in the darkness. They were moving closer, their twisted forms becoming more distinct. He tried to push himself up, but it was no use. His body refused to cooperate, as though it had been drained of all strength. He could hear the whispers in his mind again, louder than ever. They were everywhere. They were inside him. You belong here, Nathan. You've always belonged to us. The words seemed to resonate within his very soul, tearing away at his will to resist. The figures loomed over him, their skeletal hands reaching down toward him, ready to drag him into the abyss. His heart raced in his chest, and a cold sweat slicked his skin. But just as they were about to close in, everything changed. A blinding light, bright and pure, exploded from the ground beneath him, pushing the figures back. Nathan shielded his eyes, the brightness so intense it felt like it was searing into his very being. The mist around him began to dissolve, swirling into nothingness as the light expanded. The figures in the shadows screamed in anguish, their forms writhing and vanishing in the radiance. The oppressive weight of the forest seemed to lift, as if the very land was rejecting the darkness that had overtaken it. Nathan gasped, his body trembling with relief. The light felt like salvation, a force greater than anything he had ever known. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the light faded, leaving Nathan alone in the clearing. The forest was silent. Nathan stood there, his body still trembling, the echoes of the haunting whispers still reverberating in his mind. He was alive. He was free. But the questions were endless. What had just happened? Why had the light saved him? And what of the figures, the altar, and the strange pull that had led him into the depths of the forest? As the fog slowly dissipated, Nathan glanced around, half expecting to see the twisted figures lurking in the shadows. But the forest was empty. The trees no longer seemed to watch him, and the whispers had faded into silence. He had no answers, only a deep, gnawing sense that his journey was far from over. The events of the night had changed him, physically, mentally, and spiritually. He didn't know how, but something had awakened within him. And the memory of those glowing eyes, the skeletal figure, and the voice that had claimed him, it would stay with him forever. Nathan took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs. He had escaped. For now. But the truth was clear, whatever had haunted this forest, whatever had drawn him here, was not finished with him. And neither was he. That was our story for tonight. Do you think it's just an ordinary tale, or is there something more to it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. See you, if you still dare to watch next time.